Surviving a toxic relationship often leaves a deep emotional imprint that does not disappear simply because the relationship ends. Many survivors experience a confusing mix of relief, grief, anger, and numbness, all coexisting at the same time. This emotional contradiction can feel destabilizing, as the mind tries to reconcile the harm endured with the moments of affection or connection that once felt real. The nervous system, conditioned by unpredictability, may remain on high alert long after the danger has passed, making calm feel unfamiliar or even unsafe. A common psychological experience among survivors is self-doubt. Toxic relationships frequently involve manipulation, gaslighting, or subtle erosion of confidence, which can lead individuals to question their own memories, perceptions, and judgment. Even after leaving, this internalized doubt may persist, causing survivors to second-guess decisions and seek excessive reassurance. Rebuilding trust in one's own mind becomes a slow and intentional process rather than an automatic one. Shame is another powerful emotional residue. Survivors may blame themselves for staying too long, ignoring red flags, or believing harmful narratives about their worth. This shame is often reinforced by social expectations that frame endurance as weakness rather than as a complex survival response. Psychologically, shame acts as a silencing force, making it harder for survivors to speak openly about their experiences or ask for support. Many survivors also struggle with emotional regulation after leaving a toxic environment. Their emotional responses may feel exaggerated or blunted, swinging between intense reactions and emotional shutdown. This is often the result of prolonged stress and emotional invalidation, which disrupt the brain's ability to process feelings in a balanced way. Learning to tolerate emotions without fear or suppression becomes a key part of healing. Grief plays a central role in the psychological aftermath. Survivors grieve not only the loss of the relationship but also the loss of the future they imagined, the version of themselves they were before the harm, and the time and energy invested. This grief is complex because it may coexist with relief and clarity, making it difficult to mourn in socially recognized ways. The absence of clear rituals for this kind of loss can leave grief unresolved. Identity confusion is another frequent experience. Toxic relationships often revolve around control, where one person's needs, values, or emotions dominate the dynamic. Over time, survivors may lose touch with their preferences, boundaries, and sense of self. After leaving, they may feel strangely empty or unsure of who they are without the relationship shaping their choices. Survivors may also carry a heightened sense of responsibility for others' emotions. In toxic dynamics, they often learn to anticipate moods, prevent conflict, or manage emotional fallout. Psychologically, this can translate into hypervigilance and people-pleasing behaviors even in safe environments. Letting go of this learned role can feel uncomfortable, as it once served as a protective strategy. Loneliness can intensify after leaving, despite the harm of the relationship. Toxic bonds often create isolation, either through direct control or gradual distancing from friends and family. Re-entering social spaces may feel intimidating, especially when survivors fear judgment or misunderstanding. The psychological task of reconnecting requires both courage and patience. Anger, when it emerges, can be both frightening and liberating. Some survivors suppress anger during the relationship as a means of staying safe, only to feel it surface later with unexpected intensity. Psychologically, anger can signal the restoration of boundaries and self-respect, even if it initially feels overwhelming. Learning to channel anger without turning it inward becomes an important step toward recovery. Over time, many survivors begin the slow work of inner reconstruction. This involves redefining values, rebuilding self-compassion, and learning to relate to emotions in healthier ways. While the emotional aftermath of a toxic relationship can feel endless, it often marks the beginning of a deeper psychological transformation grounded in self-awareness and resilience. During toxic relationships, individuals develop coping mechanisms that help them survive emotionally and psychologically. These adaptations are often misunderstood or criticized from the outside, yet they serve an essential protective function. Dissociation, emotional numbing, or minimizing harm can allow a person to endure situations that might otherwise feel unbearable. Psychologically, these strategies are signs of intelligence under pressure rather than weakness. One common adaptation is hyper-awareness of the other person's behavior. Survivors often learn to read subtle cues, shifts in tone, or changes in mood as a way to predict conflict or danger. This heightened sensitivity can feel like intuition, but it is rooted in prolonged stress. After leaving the relationship, this same awareness may persist, making everyday interactions feel exhausting or threatening. Another survival strategy involves self-silencing. Many survivors learn that expressing needs, boundaries, or emotions leads to punishment, dismissal, or escalation. As a result, they suppress their voice to maintain peace. Psychologically, this can lead to difficulty asserting oneself later, even in relationships that are safe and supportive. Rationalization is also a frequent coping mechanism. Survivors may explain away harmful behavior by focusing on stress, trauma, or positive qualities of their partner. This mental reframing helps reduce cognitive dissonance between loving someone and being hurt by them. While adaptive in the moment, it can delay recognition of harm and complicate healing afterward. Hope functions as both a coping tool and a trap. Many survivors hold on to the belief that love, patience, or understanding will eventually lead to change. Psychologically, hope provides meaning and endurance, especially when leaving feels impossible. After the relationship ends, survivors may struggle with feelings of betrayal, not only by the other person but by their own hope. Avoidance can emerge as a protective response after leaving. Survivors may avoid intimacy, conflict, or emotional vulnerability to prevent future harm. While this creates a sense of safety, it can also limit connection and growth. Understanding avoidance as a learned survival response rather than a flaw allows for gentler self-exploration. Some survivors develop perfectionism as a way to regain control. In toxic relationships, they may have learned that mistakes lead to criticism or withdrawal. Striving for flawlessness becomes a way to prevent harm and secure approval. Psychologically, this pattern can persist long after the relationship ends, creating chronic stress and self-judgment. Humor and intellectualization are also common adaptations. By turning pain into jokes or analyzing experiences from a distance, survivors create emotional space from overwhelming feelings. These strategies can provide relief and insight, but they may also act as barriers to deeper emotional processing if relied on exclusively. Survivors often struggle with boundaries because their original coping mechanisms required flexibility and self-sacrifice. Saying yes became safer than saying no. After leaving, learning to set boundaries can feel unfamiliar and guilt-inducing. Psychologically, this discomfort signals the unlearning of survival patterns that are no longer necessary. Recognizing coping mechanisms as context-dependent responses allows survivors to approach themselves with compassion. Rather than trying to eliminate these patterns immediately, healing involves understanding when they developed and why. This awareness creates the foundation for choosing new, healthier ways of relating to oneself and others. Despite the profound harm caused by toxic relationships, many survivors experience significant psychological growth over time. This growth does not erase the pain but emerges alongside it, shaped by reflection, support, and self-discovery. Survivors often develop a deeper understanding of human behavior, power dynamics, and emotional complexity as a result of their experiences. One area of growth involves emotional literacy. Having navigated manipulation, invalidation, or emotional chaos, survivors may become more skilled at identifying feelings in themselves and others. This heightened awareness can support healthier relationships, as long as it is balanced with boundaries and self-care. Psychologically, emotional insight becomes a tool rather than a burden. Resilience develops not from enduring harm itself, but from the process of leaving, recovering, and rebuilding. Survivors learn that they are capable of surviving profound emotional challenges and making difficult decisions. This realization can strengthen self-trust and confidence, even if it develops slowly and unevenly. Many survivors also cultivate a strong sense of empathy. Having experienced emotional pain firsthand, they may feel a deep connection to others who suffer. While this empathy can be a source of compassion and purpose, it also requires careful boundaries to prevent over-identification or self-sacrifice. A redefined sense of values often emerges after healing begins. Survivors may become more intentional about the qualities they seek in relationships, such as respect, consistency, and emotional safety. Psychologically, this clarity reflects a shift from survival-based choices to values-based living. Self-compassion is a critical component of post-traumatic growth. Over time, survivors may learn to replace self-blame with understanding, recognizing that their responses were shaped by context and constraint. This internal shift can reduce shame and create space for forgiveness toward oneself. Meaning-making plays a central role in long-term recovery. Survivors may integrate their experiences into a broader life narrative that emphasizes strength, learning, or transformation. This does not justify the harm but allows it to occupy a place in the story without defining the entire self. Creativity and expression often become pathways for healing. Writing, art, movement, or spiritual practices can help survivors process emotions that feel too complex for words alone. Psychologically, these outlets support integration of mind and body after prolonged stress. Over time, survivors may reclaim a sense of agency. Choosing how to live, love, and relate becomes an act of empowerment rather than fear. This renewed agency is often quiet and internal, expressed through everyday choices rather than dramatic declarations. Ultimately, the psychology of people who survive toxic relationships is defined not only by what they endured, but by how they adapt, grow, and redefine themselves afterward. Their inner world reflects both the scars of harm and the profound capacity for healing, resilience, and self-directed change. After surviving a toxic relationship, trust often becomes one of the most fragile psychological areas to rebuild. Survivors may want connection while simultaneously fearing it, creating an internal push and pull that feels confusing and exhausting. Trust is no longer automatic or romanticized. It becomes something evaluated carefully, sometimes skeptically. This shift is not cynicism but a protective recalibration shaped by experience. Many survivors struggle to distinguish between intuition and fear. Past harm can sensitize the mind to potential danger, causing neutral behaviors to feel threatening. Small misunderstandings or emotional distance may trigger intense anxiety or withdrawal. Psychologically, the nervous system is still learning that not all closeness leads to harm, and this learning process requires time and repeated experiences of safety. Vulnerability often feels risky after toxicity. Survivors may associate openness with loss of control, rejection, or emotional punishment. As a result, they may share selectively, test others unconsciously, or keep emotional exits ready. These behaviors are not signs of emotional unavailability but reflections of a system that learned vulnerability had consequences. Romantic relationships after toxicity can awaken old patterns unexpectedly. Survivors might find themselves drawn to familiar dynamics, even when they consciously want something different. This is often due to emotional conditioning rather than desire. Healing involves noticing these patterns without self-judgment and slowly choosing differently, even when the unfamiliar feels uncomfortable. Boundaries become central in post-toxic relationships. Survivors often redefine what is acceptable, learning to say no without explanation or guilt. At first, enforcing boundaries may feel harsh or selfish, especially for those conditioned to prioritize others. Psychologically, boundary setting represents a reclaiming of autonomy and self-respect rather than rejection of connection. Communication also changes after toxicity. Survivors may over-explain, anticipate conflict, or fear being misunderstood. They may struggle to express needs directly, worrying that doing so will create distance or anger. Learning that healthy relationships can tolerate discomfort and honest dialogue is a gradual but transformative realization. Trusting oneself becomes as important as trusting others. Survivors often focus on evaluating potential partners while still doubting their own judgment. Rebuilding self-trust means honoring internal signals, responding to discomfort early, and recognizing that leaving harmful situations is always an option. This internal trust creates a sense of safety independent of external validation. Friendships and family relationships may also shift. Survivors might reassess long-standing connections through a new lens, noticing patterns of imbalance or emotional neglect that were previously normalized. This reevaluation can lead to grief, distance, or deeper intimacy, depending on how others respond to healthier boundaries. Patience is a crucial psychological skill in this stage of healing. Survivors may feel pressure to be over it or fully open again, especially when they intellectually understand what healthy relationships look like. Emotional readiness, however, follows its own timeline. Allowing trust to rebuild slowly honors the reality of what was endured. Ultimately, relearning trust after a toxic relationship is not about returning to who one was before, but about becoming someone more conscious, grounded, and self-protective. Relationships formed after healing often carry greater depth, clarity, and intentionality. The survivor learns that trust is not blind faith, but a dynamic process rooted in consistency, respect, and emotional safety.